Let's go!
The college football playoff is here, and in the matchup of 2 versus 3, an old adage will be put to the test. If defense does in fact win championships, then these two are true contenders. For the men of Michigan, 7 years of growing doubt sparking a goal realized, with head coach Jim Harbaugh finally slaying the dragon that stood between his team and the college football playoff.
Where there's a will, there's a way, and the will was very strong with our team.
But with one beast beaten, another animal awaits. A Georgia Bulldogs team that led the country in defense, surrendering less than a touchdown per game throughout the regular season. But that mettle recently tested by a rival of their own.
They didn't do any damage. No, what it did is reinvigorated our energy.
The beauty of this game, who you were is not who you are. So who are you gonna be? 2 proud programs, both trying to elevate to an elite air reserved for the game's best. It's time to punch a ticket or pack your bags as we get set for the CFP Semis.
Well, we've got our experts living it up at the beach right now, getting ready for the Orange Bowl as we kick that off tomorrow evening. Dennis Dodd, Josh Pate, thanks for joining us on HQ. Now, fellas, the second college football playoff appearance for Georgia under Kirby Smart. They lost that title game against Alabama in OT in 2017, but Smart now in his 6th season as the head coach for the Bulldogs. So, Dennis, we'll start with you. What would a win mean for Coach Smart?
Well, he's been here before. You know, they beat Oklahoma in 2017 and got to the championship game. So I don't know if it would be anything like career defining or anything like that. I think it's a step along the way. We mentioned it all week. It's championship or bust for Georgia. Now, in the moment, yes, they got worked pretty good by Alabama. And if they win, they're back to normal. But you've got that giant, again, in the back of your head. You go from a speed bump against Michigan to a brick wall against, I would suppose, Alabama.
Here's what's really interesting. A win would really not define much of anything for Kirby Smart. A loss, perceptionally, would be pretty crippling. So it feels like a no-win situation, which you never say in a playoff setting. But what's going to happen Saturday, Dennis, is if Georgia wins, Bulldog Nation kind of dusts themselves off, and all they say is, okay, we're back to where we already were. The goal is to win a title. We haven't won it yet. Let's go win a title. If they lose, if that 7.5-point dog Michigan were to win outright, and both of you and I both think they have a pretty good shot, all of a sudden, you go from being virtually wire-to-wire number 1 this year, the slam dunk favorite to not only win the SEC but win the national championship, to saying, when you look in the mirror the next morning, this team didn't even accomplish as much as the 2017 team did, and we thought this was Kirby Smart's best team ever, and in perceptionally a down year in the rest of the sport, we thought this was our best shot. And so people walk away. I'm from the state of Georgia. I can tell you good and well what they'd say. If not now, then when? And that's not anything we want to hear, at least from the Georgia side of things, come Friday night.
Haven't won the SEC, we know that, and only the 5th team to enter this BCS era coming off a loss. 64 spots since 1998, only 5 of them have been filled by teams coming off a loss. So, yeah, it would be, think of your favorite team. They get to the World Series, Stanley Cup final, and don't win. They're good, but now you got to wake up the next morning and start from the beginning. Yep. That's what a loss would mean for Georgia.
Yeah, and Georgia's seeking their first national title since 1980. So those fans, they're waiting for it, that's for sure. So then we have the flip side. We got Jim Harbaugh. He came into that 7th season as a coach of his alma mater on the hot seat. They were struggling last year. Now he's the AP Coach of the Year, leading the Wolverines to their first Big Ten title in 17 years. So what would an Orange Bowl victory mean for Harbaugh's legacy?
It's such validation, Dennis, because you and I have sort of talked. We were talking in the car ride earlier this week. We talked on air some this week about where we were, just as Jenny mentioned there, this time last year. And this time last year, because people tend to suffer from amnesia in this sport, let me remind you, Jim Harbaugh is on the hottest of hot seats. His own fan base, I'm not talking outsiders, his own fan base is asking outright, do we even want the guy back? And to the administration side of things, their answer was yes, but at a highly reduced rate. And so he comes back. Now, conventional wisdom, Dennis, would say, okay, but if you get a respite, if you get that reprieve and that second chance, surely you've got to overturn every rock and up in every stone and try and change everything about your program. He didn't change anything. He stuck with his staff. He brought in a very, very notable addition on the defensive coordinator side of things. But philosophically, they stuck with who they were, and it got him here. So to answer the question, what would a win mean? I know this sun's pretty bright on us. That win would shine 10 times brighter on us than this sun is shining on. If it were on Jim Harbaugh Friday night after a win, it would be such a feather in the cap of doing it his way as opposed to the way everyone else suggested he needed to.
I don't know what higher being that Jim Harbaugh worships, but the second highest being is Bo Schembechler.
Yeah.
He's designed the program after Bo, the playbook after Bo. If he gets within a game of the national championship, he will be in position to do something Bo never did. St. Bo at Michigan never won a championship, won some Big 8 titles, but never won a national championship. So if he gets to that point, at some point we'll talk about him, in the same breath as Bo. There's longevity issues there. He's only been there 7 years, but he's done it the Bo way. That locker room is team, and if you stay there, those who stay will be champions. I mentioned it. They're running the same plays they did 7 years ago on offense. Defensively, maybe a little different with Mike McDonald. I think that's the biggest change. Going out to his brother's team, the Ravens, and getting his linebackers coach to run a really salty defense now and develop Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo and the rest of and Dax Hill. We'll talk about him, the team's second leading tackler. But yeah, a win would put him in that lofty status. What other coach has won a championship? The last in 1997 was
Lloyd Carr.
Right.
All right, guys. Well, very important. Make sure you put your sunscreen on out there. I know we're going to be chatting with you in a little bit to make sure we're prepared for the Orange Bowl, which is going to be taking place tomorrow, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. The winner obviously advancing to Indy to face either Alabama or Cincinnati in that championship game on January 10th. And for more, you got to tune in to the Late Kick with Josh Pate. So that podcast is delivering college football game breakdowns, rapid reactions, his latest episode previewing and predicting the college football playoffs. So make sure you check that out today.
It's blue blood versus new blood as Alabama faces Cincinnati in the semifinal Cotton Bowl. The Tide making the playoff for the 7th time in its 8 years of existence, trying to become the first team to repeat in the playoff era. The Bearcats, meanwhile, the only remaining unbeaten in college football, and they've already made history, becoming the first Group of 5 program to make the playoff. But Luke Fickell says they have much, much more to accomplish.
We don't want to think we're carrying some flag for, the non-big schools, so to speak. We just want to be us.
Despite Cincy's Cinderella label, they were in a better spot to make the playoff than Alabama entering championship Saturday. The Tide were underdogs for the first time in 6 years heading into the SEC championship game, and that was all the motivation they needed to play their best game of the season.
Rice has tons of time, looks long, throws. Jamison Williams behind the defense. He's got it. Touchdown, Alabama! What a throw, what a catch.
The rat poison that you put out there this week was yummy.
After shredding a Georgia defense that many called one of the best units of all time, the Cincy defense has their work cut out for them, trying to slow down Bryce Young and the great Tide offense. It's 1 versus 4 and a trip to the national championship game on the line New Year's Eve in Arlington. And Bama, the heavy favorite, they are given 13.5. We've got Barrett Sallee joining us from Dallas. He is there to cover the game for us, and we're going to break down the Tide right now. And Barrett, they're going to be without John Mechie, their great wide receiver. He's got that ACL injury. How is that going to affect Bama's offensive game plan?
Well, it certainly puts a wrinkle into things. Obviously, they wanted to stay away from that Cincinnati secondary anyway, but I think the month layoff will certainly give them a chance to get a little bit more creative. I think they'll use the tight ends, both Jaleel Billingsley and Cameron Latu, in a variety of different ways. And I do expect Trey Sanders to be a little bit more of a factor out of the backfield. Brian Robinson's going to be the bruiser, the every down back, but they have the ability now that Trey Sanders is healthy to be a little bit more creative with how how they use running backs out of the backfield as receivers. So I think, yeah, it's a problem without Mechie. But this is Alabama. We saw Ja'Cory Brooks step in for Jamison Williams in the Iron Bowl. Things worked out just fine. I fully expect Ja'Cory Brooks to be the number 2 wide receiver, maybe 2A, and Slade Bolden 2B. But it's Alabama. They recruit this way for a reason, and this reason is exactly why Alabama has been successful. So I do expect more tight ends. I do expect more running backs out of the backfield as receivers, and I do think Ja'Cory Brooks and his emergence in the Iron Bowl will go a long way.
What about up front specifically for that Alabama offense? An offensive line that was much maligned throughout the season, then stepped up huge in the SEC championship against Georgia.
Yeah, that's the big question, right? When we saw them against Georgia, the best defensive front in the history of college football, it seems, they were fine. Bryce Young didn't get sacked at all. Going into the game, Alabama had given up the most sacks of any team in the SEC. But you cannot discount those 12 games prior. So I think the fact that Nick Saban has had a full month to pound it into his offensive line and say, hey, look, guys, your DNA actually is that of a bad defensive or offensive line. The game against Georgia is the anomaly. Now, personally, watching that offensive line in that SEC championship game up close and personal, I think they did figure it out. They made some adjustments at halftime of the Auburn game. It worked in the second half and in overtime of that one, and it carried over into the SEC championship game. I believe that's the real Alabama offensive line right now. But it is one game, and I do think it's a little irresponsible to just assume that. I mean, we actually have to see it. There is a track record of negative play for that offensive line, but I do think they got right. But let's be honest, that's what's going to determine the outcome of this game. Alabama played multiple close games with inferior opponents when that offensive line wasn't clicking. If it does click, it'll be a blowout. If it doesn't, you might see a repeat of the Florida game, the LSU game, the Auburn game, where Alabama fans are biting their nails deep into the fourth quarter.
The game's way too close for comfort. Then, of course, there's the A&M game that they lost outright. On the other side, they're going up against that really experienced quarterback in Desmond Ridder. Why do you think Ritter's tight end, Josh Whyle, is actually going to be a big focal point for the Alabama defense?
Well, because up the middle, we've seen Josh Whyle emerge in key spots for Cincinnati throughout the course of the season, and he is one of their stars. Make no mistake, he's one of their highest recruited players in a long time, and they have a history of great tight end play. But you know you're going to get mobility from Desmond Ridder. You know you're going to get Jerome Ford as a running back out of the backfield as a receiver, but also pounding the rock between the tackles. Alabama, if they get stunned with tempo, and Cincinnati, I think, will use a lot of tempo, the worst nightmare is a safety on Josh Whyle up the seam. He's almost uncoverable. We talk about some of the great tight ends in college football. He is one right now and certainly will be in the future. So I think for Alabama, you have to make sure that those linebackers don't get caught up in that eye candy with that tempo. Otherwise, they might see Josh Whyle running free down the center of the field.
Respect the swag game from Barrett Sallee. He went to the media room. He got the new Cotton Bowl playoff polo, and he puts it right on. Good looking stuff. Barrett Sallee, we're going to be talking with you throughout the afternoon and evening as we lead up to tomorrow's college football playoffs. First game is in Arlington there, the Cotton Bowl, Bama and Cincinnati, and then the nightcap is at the Orange Bowl between Georgia and Michigan. The national championship game a week from Monday in Indianapolis.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.